So let's talk about the relapse cycle and what really happens. A lot of people are very confused. They think relapse is about when the moment the addict takes the drug. But it's actually a whole cycle of events. And when you understand that, it makes it a little easier to understand how you can help an adult that you're working with who's addicted. So first of all, there is the need that something happens. Something is happening. And usually we talk about there is a trigger. Right, it's the first event. So the way I always joke about it is, how many of you feel like you have to have your cup of coffee in the morning? All right, yeah, exactly. All right, so what triggers you to get your cup of coffee? For many of us, it's things like the smell, right? For some of us who may be a little bit more addicted, it's as soon as I wake up in the morning. And for some of you, you're so needing that, you actually have a coffee pot that's set in time to go off before you even wake up in the morning. Those are all different triggers, right? So your body says, in your brain, in your chemical brain that's addicted, says, I need the drug. And it gets triggered by either time, it's been so long since I've had that drug, or a time of day, or a smell, or a sight. Many, many different things can trigger our need, desire to take the drug. Once it gets triggered, then we start having behaviors related to that need, that desire to take the drug. So some of the behaviors that people have for caffeine, for example, is they feel lethargic, right? Or they get jittery. That they really feel something in their body. Their body, they're not making it up. Their body actually starts doing stuff. And the difference between the trigger and the behaviors is that people outside of yourself actually start seeing the behaviors. You may or may not even be aware of the trigger, but as the behaviors get more and more, people can see it. So people are like, oh yeah, Rose hasn't had her morning cup of coffee, let's stay away from her because she's kind of getting a little irritating to be around because she needs her cup of coffee. So your brain has the trigger, it starts saying, take the drug, starts giving you behaviors. Then the next step is your choice to use or not use. Right? And for most of us, when we're addicted, not necessarily with even conscious thought, we find ourselves, the cup of coffee's in our hand. We plan for it. We make sure our next fix is there, right? So we just use. And we don't feel guilty about it, even if we're aware that we're addicted to it. We just say, hey, that's the way it is. We joke about it all the time, right? And so then from that, whether you use or you don't do, then your body has a response. All right? If I take my cup of coffee, I feel energetic, I'm much more positive. People like being around me. I get positive feedback for taking my drug, for myself and maybe for the other people. So they see a change in my behavior. Everyone's, oh, that's nice. Rose has had her coffee this morning. And then the cycle starts over again. And what happens with addiction is the cycle often goes faster and faster, or I need more and more for me to get that same pleasant response. Right? Whatever my body wanted in the response, whatever response I got used to. That is the addiction relapse cycle. Right? So most people say, oh, well, I have an addicted parent. They're addicted to meth or cocaine or alcohol, and that we're worried about whether they use or don't use. And we spend a lot of effort in our profession about use or not use. But that isn't the whole cycle. And what we want to really think about when we're trying to keep kids safe is understanding the different things. So, for example, if a parent's addicted to meth, we want to know what are their triggers. Because what do you want them to do? You want them to avoid their triggers, right? Stay away from the time of day, the people, the smells, the activities. But they can't avoid all of them, just like some of us can't avoid that we're going to want coffee as soon as we wake up in the morning. They may not even be aware of all of them. So we're trying to have them avoid their triggers. The next step is we want them to identify these behaviors, because that actually helps us to start to keep the child safe. So let's say we're out on a visit and we think the parent is not intoxicated. They may not be intoxicated, but they start having the behaviors that say, oh, they need to take their drug. That's what they look like when, not necessarily when they're intoxicated. We're used to thinking about that, like this one, right? We want to look for this. Because here's what happens for me, like some with the caffeine. First it's like, take the drug, take the drug, take the drug. I'm going to take the drug, take the drug, take the drug. And then it's take the drug, take. And at that time, I'm not listening for my kid. I'm thinking about how can I get to my cup of coffee? Or the meth addict, how can I get to my meth? And in that moment, I'm not thinking about keeping my kids safe, right? So we want to have that behavior identified so that we can help us as workers, the child if they're old enough, their caregivers, people supervising the visit, all be able to identify at this point that the parent is already having their brain that may be absolutely sober. If you drug test them, they're sober, but they're in their relapse cycle, right? And then when they get down here, of course, we would like them to say not use, right? We would all like them. That's, we talk about not use. That would be great, but their response to not using may still make them, they might not use, but they still may have a response that doesn't make them a safe parent. It isn't always just because you're sober you suddenly have, right? Some of you, when you don't take your caffeine, you're not better people in the moment. A month after you quit taking caffeine, then maybe you've kicked the habit, you're fine, right? But the initial not taking it does not guarantee child safety, right? So using or not using is a critical part, but we can't just focus in on that and then say, oh, let's now drug test the parent, and then we know whether they're a safe parent or not. And that if we drug test the parent up in this part of the cycle before they use, then we assume that they're safe. Those two things are is that making sense? There's much more interrelationship between the whole cycle of what relapse is about. When we think about, now let's have a relapse safety plan for the child and parent to first practice on their visits, and then if the child goes home to eventually get to the point of being able to do that. And that might be look at like several things like this. We avoid triggers, right? You see, we identify and the parent does every effort to avoid the triggers. We know the behaviors, but as soon as the parent has a trigger that they can't avoid, the parent or the other people in the child's life see the behaviors, they call for help. Get the child safe. The parent may or may not take the drug. We would prefer them, of course, not to take the drug. But this is when you'd say the difference between a drug-addicted parent who can keep their kid home safely, or we never remove their kid because either the parent, an older child, a spouse, a family member is always there to intervene and not allow that child to be caught up in this mess that happens over here while the parent gets the drug, takes the drug, and goes through their response, whatever their response is to the drug. So this is where we try to intervene here by encouraging parents to avoid. We try to know as much as possible what their behaviors look like, so having honest dialogue about our parents. Kids often can tell us what their parents look like when they're at this stage. And that there is a safety plan that will ensure that the child is safe. And then hopefully also, for example, the parent might call their therapist or AA counselor who will also help them. But the parent at this point, the addict, is probably not able to think about their child's needs first. Their brain is saying, take the drug, take the drug. And they might not take the drug, but at that point, they have to take care of themselves. And it's hard to focus on your kids and yourself when you're talking about true addiction. Any questions? All right, thank you.